Good evening. I am Vallabh Sambamurthy, Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business, and I welcome you all to the second edition of the Badger Executive Talk. The purpose of Badger Executive Talk is to bring together lifelong lessons in leadership from some of our alumni to share with the entire Badger alumni community. Today, I have a great pleasure in welcoming Tom Westrick, who is the Vice President and Chief Quality Officer and Regulatory Affairs at GE Healthcare. Welcome, Tom. It's a great pleasure to have you this evening. And Tom, it's always interesting when you hear about yourself through the words of others, they don't do enough justice. So I'm going to have you tell who is Tom Westrick, and then we will get into some of the lessons of your leadership.
Fantastic, Samba. Nice to see you, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here this evening in this virtual world that we're all in. So first off, a proud alum from the Wisconsin School of Business class of 1990. I was an accounting and a risk management major when I was in the school back in the Commerce Building, which was not nearly as fun and nice as where you currently sit today, Samba. First off, I'm married to a Badger as well. My wife, Kristen, of almost 29 years, is also an alum of the School of Business. We have two children. One is in the School of Education at UW, and one, fortunately for her, went south to a different school in Indiana in South Bend. So just to dig a little bit more about me and my career, I think like most people, I started my career with a heavy domain expertise. I was an accounting major. I got to work with great professors like Professor Jerry Wygant and others. And then I also had a risk management degree and had the pleasure of working with Dan Anderson, Joan Schmidt, still there today, and got a domain degree in accounting, which was my core degree that I took to public accounting initially. I chose accounting for some really simple reasons in hindsight. One is I knew I wanted to get into business, and I didn't know what, and I thought accounting was the foundation of really all business language. Everyone speaks, it's always numbers, and the more you know about accounting and how financial statements and financial operations work, it was just seemed like a logical place to start. And second of all, I got some tremendous feedback and advice from my father in 1987 when the economy wasn't so good. When I went to Wisconsin, he said, you need to get a job when you get out of school. And accountants were getting jobs, and it was a good market at that time. And I knew I really wanted to start after 4 years, which at that time was somewhat rare, and I wanted to get going, and the market was good. So that was my foundation. A foundation that started with a domain expertise, like a lot of folks do, I think, to come from school.
That's wonderful. You know, the saying is accounting is the language of business. So you really learn how to, and then of course, understanding risk, managing risk. Looks like you had a perfect foundation for your career journey. You have said to me, being career ready was obviously very important to you. So can you talk about that aspect and trace that journey from the time you left Madison? How did that play out? What were your first steps beyond Madison?
Yeah, thanks. So I would, first off, I would say that the school prepared me incredibly well. From a technical perspective, without a doubt, and equally as important from just a social readiness to go attack the workforce. I really felt fortunate, and I mean, as we all know, we get into the real world, and you start to see comparisons, and you say, "Oh gosh, I learned that, I knew that, I experienced that, and it was really helpful." So I did like most accountants. I went to public accounting, and I went to Arthur Andersen, which at the time is a tremendous firm. And I look back on those years, and I absolutely love public accounting. I worked in Milwaukee, a combination of Milwaukee and San Francisco when I worked for Arthur Andersen. It really taught me how to work hard, number one. I mean, you always say I work hard, and that's easy to say until you're doing it from January 1st until March 31st every day. but I learned how to work hard, and most importantly, I really learned how to lead. I learned what it meant to lead small teams, lead bigger teams, and empower others, and exponentially kind of leverage yourself to get things done. And I kind of looked around at the time and thought, gosh, the people who were the best leaders, attracted the best talent, and they also, got to go home at night before 10 o'clock because they could leverage themselves and weren't doing everything themselves. So it was actually quite simple. But one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through my time in public accounting came when Arthur Andersen went out of business. And most of you probably know that it was a terrible situation back in 2001, 2002. I won't go into all that, but I was with the firm when we went out of business. I walked across the street to Deloitte, the Deloitte practice in Milwaukee, which is where I was at the time. Purchased Arthur Andersen Milwaukee, so I just literally walked across the street, got a new business card. But I think we all need to in our careers go through something like that, something that just kind of blows you away in terms of how am I going to deal with this, and the resiliency that you develop from a situation like that, you carry with you on almost everything. I mean, everything kind of seems less significant once you go through a kind of a career / life-changing event. And at times the uncertainty, not actually too dissimilar from today, seemed overwhelming. Like what is next? I have no idea. This is unheard of. And look, 85,000 people at Arthur Andersen basically lost their jobs in 6 months because of a loss in confidence in a brand. And that lots of tremendous lessons in there. I remember one of them. The concept, that'll never happen. Never is, just remember, guys, never is a really, really long time. And I can distinctly remember sitting in downtown Milwaukee with the head of the Andersen practice the year before Andersen had all the issues, and the guy says, Tom, you're doing great. 1 year from now, barring Armageddon, you're a partner in this firm. So I think Armageddon's that doesn't happen very often. So I should be pretty good here. And 7 months later, you're like, I can't believe this. So something like that just shakes you to the core. The time is awful, but gosh, you just learn so much from that and how to deal with it. Which the last point I make on this is Samba is then I went to Deloitte and Deloitte's a great firm, no question about it. But I lost my passion for public accounting without a doubt. You go through something like this. I was always really good on the consulting side and really good on the client relationship side. I lost my passion for the industry. And lesson one is when that happens, you need to do something else. You can only fake it so long. If you're in any kind of leadership position whatsoever, it's not fair to the people who report to you that you're not you're not authentic, you're not into it yourself. And that's when I decided. I got a phone call about, like all of us, you get those calls on your worst days from General Electric here in Milwaukee. And that's when I decided to leave to go become the controller of GE Healthcare back in 2003.
So this is such a rich moment in your lifetime, and there's so many implications of this. So I'm going to tease out a couple of elements.
Yeah.
And what is interesting is that John Pearson, the CEO of Deloitte Risk and Advisory, and who was our first speaker, must have been there around the same time in different part of Arthur Andersen, because he went through a similar experience. He was also, in his story, on the verge of partnership, and then of course Arthur Andersen. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, whether we are lucky or not, we have seen in our lifetime that the destruction of a few things we took for granted. Arthur Andersen, 2008 Lehman Brothers, now the pandemic. So let me take you back to that point in time. You talked about resiliency. How do you think you coped with that at that point in time? And now if you reflect upon it, what lesson in leadership did you learn? What would you tell the young Tom Westrick of that, based upon what you learned today about resilient and leadership and career progression?
On that moment, I think there's in looking back on it, I was relatively young in my career, so I probably struggled and failed on most of those points, Samba. But I think that got me through it is two things. One I knew, and the other one I learned. The first one is trust your own core skills. You're at that time, I say you, I mean me. I was a CPA. I had 8 or 10 years of experience in the industry, more like 12 actually, and I knew that I was technically capable and had a good professional career anywhere if Arthur Andersen wasn't here. So it's, you are a great person. You've developed your career. Trust that you will be able to take those skills and apply your success based on the company you work for. And I heard that, I believe that, and that's what got me through the days of, gosh, I don't know where we're going to be in 2 years. I don't know where we're going to be in 2 weeks. The other thing that I really picked up on, and I've taken this one for sure for the rest of my career, is this becomes intensely personal. And like it or not, everybody's out for themselves in these crisis moments. And when you're trying to when everyone's worried about themselves, I should say, and how do you connect with people on your team so A, you appreciate it, and B, you can help motivate them through calming them down through this process. Okay. I saw a lot of people during those days that had extremely significant difficulty handling the situation because everyone is worried about themselves, but no one really says that. They're all saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? When they really mean is, what am I going to do? And how am I going to get out of this? And how does this mean for me? And I think when you really appreciate, when you're in a leadership position, when you appreciate that's what your team is thinking, I've taken that through the rest of my career. Because when you're in a tough situation, when you're trying to talk to the team about what we as a company, we as a group, we as a team are going to do, I'm thinking to myself, they're really thinking, how does it affect me? Yeah. How do you make it personal and also connect to team and company goals at the same time? If you don't, you just can't resonate with your team. And I think that you don't show empathy. So I, like everything at the time, I was, it would seem like the end of the world, but you get through it and then you learn from it.
That's wonderful, Tom. One of the remarks you made is that you went to Deloitte, but then you discovered you lost your passion.
Yeah.
And so you arrive at GE Healthcare. And one of the things I was intrigued by when we were talking in the past, you said, GE thought they inherited an accountant in the corner, but that's not what you had in mind. So can you talk about what that means and how did you shape your journey?
Exactly. So 10 seconds, GE Healthcare, big company. We're now an $18 billion business. We have over 50,000 people all over the world and big medical devices. We've been in the industry for over 100 years. So the company needed a controller. They needed someone who had accounting expertise. And I never really considered myself just an accountant. And I don't mean that in any negative way whatsoever. I always thought, because I loved accounting and I still do. And I love being in public accounting, but I felt to myself, I'm a business advisor at some level. So came in, they wanted just someone to call up when they had an accounting question. And I was not the first person on the list of most people to say, what's the answer to this? What's the accounting for this situation? So I guess when I came in, that was what they wanted. And that's, they say they, not we. And I never accepted that. I never no, you need someone who's a business partner. You need someone obviously who is a chief accounting officer, but someone who can help the business be better and be more visible, show more visibility to the information, the data, and what's driving the business. So use data to help drive the company. So I never accepted the role of as what it was. I also heard when I came in, okay, you're the controller. That means here's what the last 3 controllers did. Their career didn't do anything. They didn't progress. They didn't take on other roles. They didn't take additional bands. They were kind of stuck in that only accounting job, which my clients, I never saw that either. My clients had much broader roles from the one that was here. So after 10 years of being in the job, my job changed probably 10x. I just kept on taking more things on and asking more questions and sticking my neck out there of, hey, I've not seen this elsewhere. We'd try this. And in the end, it paid off. I was able to get promoted to a role that nobody in GE ever got promoted to. I became an officer of GE in about 6 years ago. So the lesson that I learned there was, gosh, don't accept what doesn't make sense. And it sounds like such a basic thing, but you join a company, you join a role, and you're told what you should do. But if you think it should be something different, don't give up on that. And I didn't. And I knew I wanted to do something. I wanted to add value, number one. And I thought I could add a lot more value if I did more things than what they asked me to do. And I trusted that instinct, and it's really worked out in a great way.
That's wonderful. So you gently but firmly kept pushing the fences outward and
Yes.
defined your role. Now, one of the elements of your further progress is that you already dealt with an adversity at Arthur Anderson. You had a role in mind with the talent, and you managed their outward growth. But then also another interesting element of many people's leadership journey is that they sometimes seize an opportunity, even if they're not ready for it. And looks like you set yourself up to take on greater roles. And then in 2016, you made a huge career leap to your current role of Chief Quality Officer and Head of Regulatory. Can you talk about why that was a big leap? What was the element that you was beyond your comfort zone? And then what motivated you to seize that opportunity, and how did you excel in that opportunity?
Right. That's a great question. I still kind of ask myself that question today, actually. How did I get here? But yeah, I just a little bit of background. When I was in the quote controller role, I took on so many additional roles when I was in that job. I was a chief risk officer at one point. I was the head of treasury. I was the head of business development, finance. And I was always kind of someone who was good at connecting to the business and understanding the regulations and applying the regulations and really focused on external outcomes. But it was when literally Jeff Immelt asked me to be the head of quality and regulatory affairs at healthcare, it was not as crazy as it sounds today and on paper because of all the things I was doing on the side. But after I was in the job for like a month, I'm like, what did I do here? This is crazy. I mean, I don't know anything about this. I mean, it was a little overwhelming at the time of, initially it was like, oh, this is a natural progression. I'll get into operations more and I'll take this into a much bigger career beyond finance. And after about a month, you live in ignorance for a while and it's not so bad. And then you realize what you don't know. And then you're like, oh my God, this is a big career leap. And you kind of wake up and say, I left a safe haven of being in finance for 26 years, great external resume, felt tremendous, paid well. I mean, what did I do this for? And it was a tremendous leap of faith that took a few days, weeks, months, and maybe even years to kind of get my feet wet. But I can tell you this, this is always easier to say until you live it too. This change, I learned more in 4 years than I think I learned in 10 being in finance. And no disrespect to finance. Of course, I learned a ton there. But when you throw yourself into a completely different world, I mean, I'm telling you, you will wake up in the morning a little firmer and you will get in front of, you will listen more intently because you can't repeat sentences. You can't repeat, you can't finish sentences. I'm sorry. You don't know. The team clearly knows more than you. I've never been in a world in my life where I mean, as the controller, you're always, as a chief accounting officer. And so in theory, I knew more about accounting than most, or I hope, right? But when I took this role, my team knew more of domain than I did by far. This was a true test of leadership. And leadership in this particular position needed help. And that's why they put me in the job. They needed someone to change the direction of this team and put it customer first versus customer and regulatory compliance. We were always safety, and that's good. Of course, it's required in this industry, all industries. But we were losing sight of our focus on customer satisfaction and customer success. And wasn't even really asked to do that. That was kind of the next step. One was we need a big leader that can rally the team and improve the culture. And then I got in and I kind of ran the same play as when I was in the controlling job, the controllership job. I'm like, gosh, guys, we're not spending enough time on customer satisfaction and customer relationships, and we're doing well, importantly with the regulators, but we need to be, our products and services are, what are we doing relative to customer sat? And I woke up one day, I went to the CEO and said, like, I'm changing the scope of this job. We need to focus on the whole picture a lot more than we are. And look, it was a leap of faith to do that. We have great people, we have great products, and I just wanted to connect the system more to the overall customer experience, and that was an extension of what we were doing before, and that's what I did. It was another kind of a sharp moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to change what we're doing in the past here, but it felt like the thing to do because it said,
Right.
it felt like the right value we could add at that time, and that's what we did. So it was that was a big challenge, a big step, and after being in the job now for 4.5 years, it's been a huge success, and it set me up, I guess, in summary, for a lot of things beyond this role that
Yeah.
would never have been thought of, 4 years ago. Never in a million years. I mean, this was
Yeah.
another PhD on top of the MBA, I guess. It kind of got me ready.
It's fascinating because you certainly demonstrated resilience in the moment of adversity. You took a leap of faith and grew into a new skin and made it successful.
Right.
So this is an interesting time in leadership for most people, in many of the Badgers. The word disruption, the word transformation, they've become almost like a daily grind. And you have been at GE, and what's interesting about your time at GE is you lived through many transformations and disruptions of all kinds. You told me that GE transformed itself at least 5 times in your 18 years. You've been the rock, and around you there have been 3 GE CEOs. There have been 4 healthcare CEOs. So what's interesting is that even as you are reinventing your role, you're adjusting to new leaders above you, and you're trying to explain the changes to your colleagues. Sounds like a very rich landscape. So could you talk a little bit about what has all these transitions and growing in leadership surrounded by change taught you, and advice you can pass on to the younger Badgers listening in tonight?
It's a great question, Samba. First off, I'd say accountants and change are not two. Look, I'm an accountant, and I can say this: I wasn't good at this when I left public accounting. I like things.
That's why you did not want to be the accountant in the corner, right?
That's right. I accountants like closure. They like kind of pictures to see them, and so to kind of adopt a being more comfortable with ambiguity and transformation took time to get yourself into it. And I you're right. I mean, like all companies transform all the time. I don't think those numbers you cited are probably vastly different at all the companies everyone's watching this would see. I mean, we're always constantly revolving. And I tell you, the thing that strikes me, whether I was at Anderson or now at GE, which is both phenomenal companies in my opinion, is leadership. It's such a cliche, but leadership matters in a major way. And we see it around us in our personal life and politics. And gosh, when I look back and I think of things that have not gone well, it never is about we just couldn't figure it out or we couldn't execute because some technical matter. It usually comes down to just some leadership failure. Didn't talk enough, weren't clear enough on the goals. So I just think in any situation, particularly in transformation, leadership and finding those who can really lead you through a major disruption of change is a big deal. But I did, to answer your question specifically, I got 4 or 5 things here, just real quick, I'll punch out, of things that have helped me through it. Big changes and kind of just managing a career over 18 years now in GE. You have to be adaptable, and you have to think about, like, you just don't go to work every day and kind of knock the pins down. You have to really challenge yourself. And the first one is, when you're in a situation where there's significant changes, don't fight it. You do not fight it. I mean, it's the defensive behavior you get to when you see it. I saw it in many, many colleagues, and I learned from others' failures. I do that a lot. Is you look like the person who fights it. You're defensive. You're protecting the past, and it's a loser. It's a losing hand. But we're so proud of what we've done sometimes that you just can't help yourself, right? And then I do ask myself, well, if we're doing this, I've asked myself to ask others, if we're doing this big transformation, if we're doing a change, was it working great before? I mean, just kind of throw that back. So why would we try something different? It's kind of like, some points I'm a big sports guy, and sometimes you just change head coaches because you need to change. And there's an element that I watch people fail though, because they become very defensive, they don't get on board, and it never ends well. The second thing is, it links back to my Arthur Anderson days, is personalizing. Recognize, have empathy that in transformations, your team, yourself, you're worried about your own career. And how do you show empathy to your team so they know it's not just about the company goals? And I personalize everything for myself, and I try to do that with my team as well. The next two quickly is when you think about your career and you're working, and I've looked at my own career, who do you want to hang out with in a business? I mean, who do you want to be? Who's your peers? And peers I'm not just looking at an org chart. I mean, who do you want to spend time with, learn, connect with? And I've always been one to find the change agents. I find the people that are I call it appropriately disruptive, who are asking the hard questions, who don't sit at a meeting and just agree with everything, even though they don't, and then walk out and say they don't to somebody else. Look, and aligning yourself to change agents is not easy, because it's usually harder. It requires more work. It's not always popular, because it's you're getting your people out of their comfort zones. But in the end, you want to be tied to something that's a problem that you fix. And I guess that's probably one of my brands, Samba, from leadership, is just follow the problems.
Okay.
At some level, you want to get credit for things, but you're not going to get credit for things by just status quo. You got to shuffle it up a little bit. How do you add value? And it's just adding value it's not an annuity. Your career is not this just perfect path forward. You have to take it up along the way. And then lastly, be transparent and quick. I mean, we all make really, really tough decisions in business world today, whether it's what to invest in, whether it's people decisions on, hiring, firing. The question that my current CEO in healthcare has asked me all the time when I'm struggling with decisions is, he said to me, and I resonate all this time, is, when's the last time you said, I made a decision too soon? I should have waited. And my personal development is I really can overthink things at times, and then you get kind of overspent and over matured on an issue, and you get frustrated. Then you want action right away. And I just think that you got a tough decision. Be transparent and make it fast. Trust your gut. And you look back on the tough decisions I've made, and my gut was right from the beginning. And then I asked myself, why did it take me 6 months then to do something? And you lose 6 months. And the key commodity none of us have enough of is time. None of us are going roles. I don't go into role thinking I've got 10 years to fix something. I mean, I think of things in terms of quarters, months. Where are you on that adding value spectrum? And it can't be. Nobody has forever. I think the average life of a CEO is 3-4 years. I mean, it's tiny, right? So that's my lessons on, I think, a transformation. Kind of how do you attack it, and just 3 or 4 points there of it's worked for me.
Right. Well, certainly it looks like there's a lot more room for growing, learning, and acting when you're in the eye of the storm rather than on the periphery. So, and you certainly seen so much of action, which makes you a perfect person for the next this question. The pandemic, the first few months of the pandemic, we were all essentially trying to be resilient and adapt. Some people feel that actually this is the time for great business experimentation, because there is signals about the future. So if Tom Westrick were to prognosticate about the future of business, what would be a couple of significant prognostications?
Wow, that's a tough one, Samba. That's a big one. Let me work my way into that if I can. The pandemic has been. I mean, that's right in my career. This is right there. I don't know yet because it's not over, but it's right up there with the Arthur Anderson situation. Like, never to be seen, never to be predicted event. I'll get technical a little bit on your question. I think it's relevant to really any industry. Is we're, like I said, we're a big global medical device company. We have like all of you probably, thousands of suppliers all over the world, and supply chains took a real hit during this process, to a level like I've never seen. A year ago, you look at a flow of goods in an industry, in any global company, and it probably starts with something in Southeast Asia, then it might go to China, then it might go to India, and eventually it gets to Memphis, and it gets to another truck, and it gets to your warehouse in Madison, and you make it. And at the time, you look back and I'm like, God, that's a lot of air miles by the time it actually lands in a product. And how does all that work? And well, it does. And you kind of shake your head and you move on because everyone else is doing it. And during the pandemic, when the whole world, people can't get on airplanes, right, and freight's not moving, people can't go to work, and there's no place to hide. Of course, I mean, every when I say hide, I mean there's no part of the world that was safe from this. The disruption in supply chain and the ability to fulfill products on a global scale with a global supply chain was unbelievable at times. I mean, literally, I was on conversations where you're like, wait a minute, did the plane from Singapore get to Bangalore so the part can get to the supplier, then they can drive it to Bangalore to ship it to, I mean, all these conversations are going on and you're like, I didn't even know this existed 7 months ago. And now you're worried about a plane going to a tier 3, 4 supplier so that supplier can get it to another supplier. We can get it to the supplier I'm paying for that can get it to one of our plants. And I think every industry struggle with this because it's just the nature of how the world is so flat, right? So I think we'll come out of this, maybe to your question of what's the future hold. Everyone talks about de-risking supply chains. It happens all the time. There's enterprise risk management. I led that for a while too. You talk about what's our risk in supply chain, and it's all theoretical. You talk about theoretical risks. Well, no, this is real. This is really fresh in our mind, and I think and the ability, the impact is the inability to deliver with certainty on time to a level you're expecting, and I think companies are going to really look hard at their supply chains. Like, how can I de-risk this? I mean, planning for a pandemic, no, but does it have to be this hard? Should we have less risks? And in the end, you get through it. But how difficult was it? And is it sustainable this way? So I think supply chains will change. We'll have to adapt here. And I think a lot of lessons learned in all industries. A couple of thoughts here is a good thought is I was so amazed and pleasantly surprised, I should say, on the level of empowerment, the level of activity and just decision-making by our employees. You sit back in a non-stressful situation like we've been in, and you got so much structure, you have so much approvals, and the decision-making can be very hierarchical, which is frustrating to many. But this particular situation, you're like, okay, I need an answer. Here's the situation. I need an answer in an hour. And empowering our employees and watching them, including myself, and just watching people step up and take on additional responsibility without the structure that was thought to be needed was amazing. I mean, I can remember being on calls myself, the CEO empowering me. I did a bunch of COVID-related response programs during this, and I was in meetings with a couple of people on my team, and we'd be working on this really complicated issue of how are we going to solve this. And near the end of the meeting, you'd be like, okay, so who do we have to run this through? What's our timing? And I'd be like, well, we have to run through the people on this call, and we're making a decision before we hang up. and it was like, okay. And I was just like, it's really make me think about, look, every company needs the right governance. And I'm not suggesting for a second you're making careless decisions, but do we empower our people enough? And when you watch them rise when they have to, my answer is no. And we have to give our team more and stretch them more. And gosh, the things they'll come up with is amazing. The last point I'll make is working from home.
Yeah.
Well, I've been working from home except for today for almost exclusively.
At least 5 months.
Yeah, long time. And like most, I don't work in a plant in a factory, so I'm non-essential at some level. So It's very transactional right now to me in companies, in all companies. And I talked to a lot of people, my friends in other industries, and look, we're getting work done, and we're talking on Zoom, and in some ways we're talking more because you're always sort of available, and the work day is stretched from literally all day. I worry about long term is innovation. I mean, when I think about the really good ideas that I've had and been associated with, it's late nights, cold pizza, and
Yeah.
you're in a conference room on a whiteboard scratching out stuff. And I look forward to the day we all get back into doing that, because it's just that constant dialogue with big groups is, I think, how things really, really get done. So that's I don't know if it's a prediction but just more of a thought on the pandemic. But there'll be books written and changes made on how it works for a long time. And look, I don't know back to the uncertainty and the resiliency is. I think people planning cycle is short.
Right.
Weeks are
lots of professors, lot of thinkers, and a lot of practitioners will be busy for the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's like writing the Arthur Anderson story. What happened here?
And it's interesting that you talked about de-risking. So I guess coming out of the risk management program prepared you for the future of de-risking the supply chain.
Absolutely.
So Tom, another topic management area that you're very passionate about is diversity and the diverse workforce. And so can you share with us briefly, why do you believe a diverse workforce will always win in business?
Yeah. First off, Samba, I'd like to just say I'm deeply concerned with the current events. I mean, I can't say enough about that. It worries me. It sickens me at times. I mean, we're all in this together, and that's a concern in a big way. As it relates to diversity inclusion within the workforce, first off, there's I'm skipping over the obvious. It's the right thing to do, and the moral responsibilities to treat everyone equally is a given. But when I jump then to the workforce, the diversity of thought is incredibly important to me. I've never worked in a team that in GE that more than half of the team. Let me say it differently. All my teams have always had more than 50% of the people living outside the United States, and that's diversity at a level for me. Okay, I just think, and then you get into the gender and unrepresented minorities, and the power of diverse thinking, or the lack thereof, is massive to business outcomes, particularly in this incredibly volatile world. Having as much input as you possibly can get from different perspectives is critical to finding the right answer. And I get very worried if people don't challenge me. I get very worried if I look around and I see too many people with my background. I get worried when people look like me if I'm in a meeting. I think from just a pure outcomes perspective in a business environment, you're missing tremendous input, and it's hard sometimes, right? I mean, it's easier to have a conversation with someone in Milwaukee just quicker than calling up one of my colleagues in Beijing or Paris, where their first language is not English, and working through that. But if I don't take the time to do that and gather that input, I'm going to miss. And the other reality is, guys, it's a global world, and more than half our revenue is outside the United States in our business. And look, it's not like it's them and us. It's like our China business is growing bigger than the rest of our businesses in other regions around the world. I mean, you have to follow where the business dynamics are. So I learned early about not having this. And I think the other point I'd make is, so that's obvious, I think, is externally customers, regulators, government officials, they demand it. And not maybe directly, but I think if you don't have a diverse team around you, and others do, I think you'll lose because it sends a message, and it's intensely personal. It's the last point I make on this topic is it's just you have to invest in your team, and it's this. No disrespect to my HR colleagues because I love them and I need them dramatically, but you don't lean on HR to solve this for you. It becomes intensely personal to the leader to develop your team, a diverse team, and grow talent in your organization. Honestly, and I made this comment, my team kind of looks at me funny. 50% of my time, when you're transactionally answering something or just working through your day, that's a different discussion. But on weekends or nights or driving around, what are you thinking about? You should be thinking about, I don't know what should, but I think about my team. Do I have the right people in the right roles? Are they working well with others on my team? Do I have the right individuals underneath them that provide a backfill if someone would leave? When your mindset is you're spending most of your time worrying about your team, I think that's a good place to be, particularly with advanced stages of your career, because I realize that the success is only as a function of, do I have a good team? The team I have now is 1,200-1,400 people. I mean, what am I going to do? Literally, I got to pick the right people that will really help us get something done. So anyway, the whole topic of diversity and inclusion and people management is really close to my heart. And I think, all the way back to my days in public accounting, in some level, it's basic as the best leaders had the best people, had the best balance in life. They weren't micromanaging, which means they could have some balance in their personal life. And when you kind of get that rhythm right, it's a lot of fun. So.
Very good, Tom. And, we had a fascinating conversation so far about your leadership journey and your insights about business. And it's time for us to open up to questions from the audience. And I have a first one for you, Tom, from Lisa on customer-centric quality. Lisa asks, what are some of the measures that you successfully brought to your quality organization which showed that the organization provides leadership to bring business value to the customers?
Yeah, great question, Lisa. I want to emphasize that in a medical device space, safety is number one. We spent a tremendous amount of time making sure our products are safe in the marketplace, and that is a critical deliverable, safe and effective. And our team has been very focused on that and remains that to be number one. The things that we weren't looking at were things that were customer irritants. We weren't delivering on time. We weren't installing on time. Maybe a part took too long to get there. Maybe there was it didn't last as long, so it wasn't as reliable. So we wanted to focus on some of those customer hot points. And it's really easy to sit back and anecdotally throw thoughts in the organization and say, we should do that. But in most companies, that's a losing hand if you don't have data. So the thing that we did right away was we created the call for action based on data. What are the metrics we want to measure that were customer focused, that were more customer focused, that we weren't putting as much attention on initially? And that was what we did. So and we started creating the case for more action in this area by highlighting the areas in the data that showed that we had a problem. And then it becomes not Tom's idea. It becomes like, well, geez, here's what the customers are telling us. And having that be the North Star, start to drive action. And then you get people rallied around it. We added more people to the team with a little bit different backgrounds on how they thought about deliverable of quality, and you add it all up, and it just feeds itself. It doesn't. I don't even have to talk about it anymore. It's like, okay, we're looking at it in the lens of safety and compliance and anything that's a customer irritant. That's how we did it.
Right. Very good, Tom. And this is the next question, a slightly different focus. One can say that in terms of advancing one's career, there are two different approaches. One is longevity with one organization, learn a lot about the organization, establish your credibility, and grow the sphere the way you did it, and grow within one or maybe two organizations. The alternative pathway is to diversify your experiences across, not to hop every year or 2 years, but to acquire a diversity of experiences across firms and industries. As you reflect back, what would you say to our Badger alums listening in about the pros and cons of the merits of the two different pathways?
Yeah, great question. I'll, in the interest of time, so make sure we get through the questions. I'll answer pretty quickly. I absolutely promote as many experiences as you could possibly get, particularly when you just get out of school, because who knows what you really want to do. Even after 30 years, who knows what you want to do, right? So I was able to get my experiences through working through huge companies. GE, 300,000 employees, or 385,000. So I was able to get a lot of different experiences by working through principally two very big companies. If that worked for me, and I think you could get different experiences by working for 10 different companies, but I was able to get it through just the size and the scope and the diversity of operations in these big companies. In hindsight, though, what I probably would have wished I would have done more, and maybe I'll have a chance before I stop working to do this, is work overseas, live overseas. I had a chance to do this when I was working in San Francisco, and for lots of reasons, probably none of them good in hindsight, I didn't want to do it. But I missed that. And I think if you're at any point in your career where that makes sense for you personally, I don't think I've heard, I'm sure there's cases, but very rare instances where someone says, took a job, pick a country, and I lived there for 1, 3, whatever it is, years, and it was terrible. It always comes back with, gosh, it was the best experience of my life. Man, did I learn so much about life, cultural, professional. I've had global jobs almost my whole career, but I think living somewhere is different. It is. No, I don't think it. It obviously is different, and I just, if I could turn the clock back, probably, 15 years ago, and it would have worked good for my personal life, is to go live someplace or outside the United States for a while.
That resonates with me. The first time I met you, you were flying back from London into Milwaukee, and you looked fresh and sharp. And and I've always felt in my own transition over the past 15 years that talking about being global is very different from being global. It's the time zones and the culture, the language, and how can you seamlessly move back and forth, and that can only be experienced. It cannot be. You cannot talk about it in a vicarious manner.
No, that's right.
The other interesting question, Tom, you've lived through is a big experiment at GE. GE Digital. It was a vision about GE is this premier company, and I'm assuming that the GE Digital was as much about transformation as it was about learning, and it was many things. Could you take a moment to share your commentary on the GE Digital experience, and what did it teach you about leadership and transformation? Any advice?
Yeah, I think on the first off, digital is a very large generic word. I think as it relates to GE Healthcare and digital, I'd like to talk about that, because I think that's what I'm the closest to, Samba, is when you look at what we make today, whether it's ultrasound machines, CAT scans, MRI, anesthesia, all these are products in the GE Healthcare portfolio for years. You think about, we're taking a picture of, and I tend to think very simply about most things, actually. But we're taking pictures of things today, and if through software, through AI, through machine learning, what if we can take the pictures that we have today and compare those to thousands of other pictures that are similar to that help us predict what things are going to look like in the future. And in a very, very simplistic world, that's how I think about digital in a healthcare environment. Is there's all kinds of things that help workflow and running hospitals and running healthcare institutions that are very important too. But when you think of diagnosis, what information can we use to help predict what's going to happen? And in an extraordinarily simple example, you think of like weather forecasts, like watch what happens over the next 12 hours. And, we're trying to take, the industry is trying to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to help us use it as a predictive tool. And I think it's so exciting, and it's such a home run when we all figure it out. I mean, obviously it helps for outcomes. You find things earlier. It takes a tremendous amount of cost out of the system because you're treating early versus you're preventing versus treating. It just changes people's lives. They find things, the treatments and the therapies come faster before the acuity rises. And as I think about that from a leadership perspective, what I ask myself and our team asks ourselves all the time is, and you said it, digital. Like you kind of paralyze yourself when you hear that, because what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I always ask myself, and our teams always ask, like, what does it mean to the patient? What does the customer feel? Why, what's the value here? Give me the outcome from a customer perspective of what AI means. Okay, show me how life improves in the market because of what we're doing here. Because we all kind of get enamored with the technology and the data and the terminology. And if you come from an equipment background like me, you don't even understand enough of it. You see, really, we just kind of we always force ourselves to just break it down. What are we doing here? You think of, we always talk about, the killer apps. We all have them on our own iPhone. What's the killer apps going to be for healthcare, where everyone has to have it? I got to have this app. This is like, I can't live my life without this thing. And that's where it's an exciting place to be in healthcare. I mean, it really is. I mean, as a consumer of healthcare, like we all are, the innovation and the technology and the advancement of all this, I think the pandemic is just pushing it faster, is really exciting. And it's an unlimited ceiling of what this could all mean. So that's how I think about it.
Now that's insightful, because there's a theme running through your lessons learned, which is think about your customer, walk in the shoes of the customer, and think about what customers' problems are you solving, and that provides a powerful focus. So that's really insightful. Here's a question from Jennifer Tom. You talked a lot about your team, thinking about your team, how to develop them. So what's your mental process as you think through your team? How do you talk to them about development? And to that, I would add, how do you coach your team?
I really like that question. Thanks, Jennifer. We all learned, like, the 10 seconds after you start a job, that the personal professional balance hits you immediately. It's like theoretically out there, and then you get to your job and you're like, oh my gosh, this is real, right? How much I want to climb this ladder, given the personal sacrifices that come with it. So one of the first things I really do with the people who report to me, and I encourage my managers to do the same thing, is find out what the team, find out what your employees want to do. Like what is your passion? Like, what do you want to do? Let's start with that. Like, what do you really want to do? And how does it work in your life? And I don't need to know, obviously, anything personal about someone, but like, how much can you dedicate to your career? And there's no right answer there. I mean, just what is the answer? So we can start to formulate a role that makes sense given what you want to put into it. I've seen so many examples in my 30-year career. Someone says they want the biggest job on earth. They get the biggest job on earth. It takes too much time, and they quit, and the company's bad because they worked them to death. And they knew kind of going into that role, like this is what it is. Are you sure you want to do this? And we make mistakes all the time. And I've done them temporarily myself. So I spend a tremendous amount of time with the team. What do you want to do? What, and how does it fit into your life? Once you kind of get a framework and a kind of an agreement about what you want, then I spend a ton of time just working with the person. And I've got a person on my team right now who's just a tremendous performer who's grown in the system over the last 4 years. You just keep giving the person more work, not more volume, but more experiences.
Okay.
So understand where they come in, or understand like what do they want out of their job. And look, there's a selfish element to it. The highest best use of a person is the highest best use for a company. A happy person is great for the business. A happy person means they have passion for the role, and they're going to be happy, and they're going to do great work, and they're also going to develop people. So the circle kind of works, but you got to get to know the team. You got to spend time with them and really understand what makes them tick. Not everybody wants the biggest job. Not everybody wants what other people wanted before. And when it's really worked for me is when you find that person who's like making it work for themselves, and they're really happy with their career and it's working for them on their personal life. It's like success because they're all in. They're all in. And when someone's not in a situation like that, you got to deal with it. You got to deal with it and make a change, either the job or the role or the person. That it's inevitable. You're going to have a problem. So that's how I think about it.
Tom, they say time flies when you're having a good time, and we've had a very rich conversation. So before I let you go, there is a book out there with Tom Westrick as the author. What would the title of that book be?
I hope it doesn't have Tom Westrick's picture on it. Let's start with that. I'm not smart enough to fill in the blanks around. There's some probably really marketing. Never been in marketing some, but never done that. Marketing title that would sell something, but it's as simple as it sounds. But the word authenticity has to appear in the title. Yeah. And we've all worked with someone in your career who's not authentic, or you can feel as there's another agenda. And it doesn't work. I think if you're authentic, the power of authenticity with leadership, something like that, if that makes sense. I think that the formula that when you're authentic and you get to know folks, they trust you, you trust them. They want to work for you. They want to do a great job. They don't want to let you fail. And if you're not transparent, not authentic, it's just a matter of time before there's, I think, passive aggressive behavior and dysfunctionality and sub-optimized outcomes. And
there you go.
The last 5 seconds I'd say on that is, look, I think, you got to, I don't think you have to be friends with your employees, but I think it's important that they like you and you like them. I mean, we're all humans and we want to work with people we like. Look, you can get through it, but it's not as fun. It's not as good. It's not as optimized. So I think having good, it's that. So I can't think of the any more words on the title page than that, but that's where I'd start, Samba.
I think the authentic leader fits you, Tom. In the past 1.5 years, I've gotten to know you. So it's Westrick on authentic leadership. That's a good title.
There you go.
And Tom, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And it's been a very fascinating journey. And I'm sure that we've learned a lot of insights. And hopefully it helps many members in the audience connect your stories with their journey and know that take risks, never be afraid of change, and be authentic seem to be some important principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. On Wisconsin.
Thank you. On Wisconsin. So I hope that we had a rich discussion. I hope that you all had a chance to find some points and bearings to connect with Tom's journey. And before we goodbye, let me remind you that we'd like to invite you for the next Badger Executive Talk in October. It's Gail Fugit, and she is the former Vice President at General Mills and former Chief Officer of Customer Insight at Foursquare. Lot of rich leadership experiences. And please join us on October 6th. Good night and on Wisconsin.